tonight. Why so high?
Prices may be swinging wildly between $2.50 and perhaps $5 a gallon, so you better plan for the tough days as well as the days when it's not so much of a dent in your wallet.
A special report understanding the dramatic increase in the price of gasoline. Before it goes up at the pump, it's being pumped up here. And from the cause to the consequences, American ingenuity keeps the country rolling.
There are non-four-wheeled alternatives to getting around and getting around efficiently.
We'll bring you the news next on Dan Rather Report.
And where else would you begin a report on gasoline than in Los Angeles, a city with more cars than eligible drivers? Traffic, it's as constant as California sunshine. Day or night, weekends, holidays, always, they're on the road. It's a metropolis that grew up alongside the automobile, paving the way for America's urban sprawl. In this part of the country, your identity has long been determined by what you drive. Hollywood has even looked at its own car culture in films like L.A. Story.
First stop is 6 blocks from here.
Why don't we walk?
Walk? A walk in L.A.
But even in this car-crazed capital, $4 a gallon gasoline has made this a common scene.
All right, let me go over a couple of things with you and we'll be on our way, okay?
Okay.
Claudia Rode is picking up her new Toyota Yaris.
I was just looking for something economical that looks good, you know, good in gas, and I think I found the perfect car. It looks great, and it's very compact.
Small in size, but big on mileage. 39 on the highway. But in L.A., always on the cutting edge, there's small, and then there's small. Really small. This is the latest trend on California roads. And talk about mileage. This baby sips where others drink.
I'm so glad that I drive the Vespa every day.
This is Russell Stroud, and this is how he gets around town. Really, his Vespa scooter, all 12 horsepower, is the latest trend. And in a city known for creative driving, the Vespa adds this to the mix.
I think people hate it when I go by and they're sitting still on the freeway and I'm zipping through the cars. Sometimes they even kind of edge towards you to keep you from going by. If I'm driving my car to school, it's going to take me an hour, hour and 15, hour and a half. If I drive the Vespa, it's never taken me longer than 30 minutes, even with bumper-to-bumper traffic. Because, you know, you can go between the cars on the freeway, and besides that, you can go for a week without filling it up, and then when you fill it up, it's like $8.
I think people are starting to realize that there are non-four-wheeled alternatives to getting around and getting around efficiently.
Drew Teague is a Vespa salesman who has been dealing with a mad rush of commuters who are willing to leave the safety of their cars to avoid the pain at the pump. While big cars are sitting in showrooms, Teague's sales of these Italian-made scooters are up more than 100%. And he has a problem most car dealers would love.
So we're selling over twice as many bikes to the point where it's almost hard to keep them in stock. We've actually had to get shipments about every week, truckloads of bikes in here to fulfill the needs of what everybody's looking for. I just had a couple that came in. They each had a Range Rover, getting, you know, sub 15 mpg per vehicle, and they said, we have just had it, you know. So they're selling one, they're getting a Vespa, and they're tripling or more their average fuel efficiency for their transportation.
The main selling point of a Vespa is not how much time you can save on your commute, but how much gas. Vespas can get up to 70 miles per gallon, almost double the mileage of a hybrid car. And that's made these $5,000 scooters an easy sell, wherever gasoline prices are high.
And here in Connecticut, The roads aren't as crowded, but drivers have the dubious distinction of paying the highest gas prices in the country, well north of $4 a gallon, and climbing. This is a story that affects everyone and ripples through every segment of our society. So the question is, how high will gas prices go? And what's caused the price of oil, what's really caused it, to more than double in the last year? Throughout tonight's program, we intend to give you a look at not only the consequences, as you just saw from Southern California, but also what and/or who is to blame. For context and perspective, I sat down with Tom Closa, founder of the Oil Price Information Service. He's one of the best reporters around about oil and gas. He's been following gasoline price trends for decades. As you know, I'm a Texan by birth and by choice. And it said only half-jokingly that in Texas, don't mess with a mama and don't mess with a pickup truck.
Right.
Even though the pickup truck may get 15 miles to the gallon. Realistically, any chance of changing that mindset nationally?
I think the mindset's starting to change. I mean, now that we've had prices go to $4 in some places, and we've had this bipolar market which has these tremendous swings, I noticed last month that the small car and vehicle sales represented 20% of total U.S. Vehicle sales. And that may not seem like a big threshold, but that's a big, big number in the automotive business. So you're hearing more about it. You're hearing more about it, whatever mode of travel you have. And it takes a while to breed that sentiment change. And we're seeing a little bit of a shift. It would be nice if it was pushed, because there really is no downside of conservation or doing things practically. But you can't expect an industry like the energy industry to say drive less or whatever. I mean, we wouldn't expect that from anyone else that manufactures widgets or any other product.
Do you or do you not subscribe to the theory that $4 a gallon gasoline on any consistent, lasting basis is the tipping point? If it goes above that, then the public will start going to scooters, bicycles, walking more.
We are using less, and that's going to show up in the subsequent data. Right now, the investment community and the speculative community believes that the rest of the world still has this growing appetite for fuel. We'll get the data on that well down the road, but there's no question that Americans have cut back. In California, people have cut back by about 4.5%. And that's a lot when you consider all the new drivers coming into the motor pool each year. That's a significant sacrifice. It's not like the 70s where maybe people would cut back by much more because it was a tripling or a quadrupling of price, but people are making some sacrifices. Unfortunately, a lot of folks because they have to, not because they're making it as a matter of choice or because of social responsibility.
Here's an interesting number. Americans drove 11 billion fewer miles this March than they did in March 2007. It's the sharpest drop ever reported. So how are they getting to work? We take you to the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where former die-hard drivers are changing their habits early and often. 5:58 a.m. Friday morning at the Dulles Transit Center in Loudoun County, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. The bus line is already full of the newly converted for the hour-long bus drive into town.
Gas is too high. You need to come up with alternatives, and this is one of the alternatives to get us to work.
Loudoun County just added 2 more buses and says ridership is up 29% from last year. 6:30 a.m. at the Wheelie Park and Ride in Reston, Virginia. Karen Burrows meets her carpool.
All right, everybody's ready?
We're all ready. It's Friday.
Their 20-mile trip made easier by carpooling.
It's the only way to go. Carpooling is the only way to go.
You save money, you save on gas, you save wear and tear on your car, frustration of driving.
I saved about $3,240 a year by carpooling.
Karen and her crew make it into work in just 25 minutes, thanks to the holy grail of commuters, the special high occupancy vehicle, or HOV, lane.
Had I driven in on my own, it would have taken me about an hour, 10 minutes.
We're saving, just a weekly 800 miles, driving less. I mean, that's significant just in 1 week.
And we don't even have a hybrid.
8 a.m. on 95 North in Virginia. Solo drivers are at a standstill. while cars with 3 or more passengers zip by. Getting in the fast lane is so important to some drivers, they'll pick up perfect strangers to qualify. 8:15 at the Potomac Mills Shopping Mall in Woodbridge, Virginia. These drivers are lining up to pick up hitchhikers who call themselves slugs. The drivers can get into the fast lane. The slugs ride for free.
The savings on gas as well as the parking, I don't see why not. I don't really mind. I mean, you ride with almost the same people every day anyway, so.
Why do you sled versus drive in?
Because there's easier and economically is really good and also very convenient.
Do you mind the term slug?
No.
There are so many slugs these days that the shopping mall has limited their parking to the left side of this blue line so they don't take over the entire lot.
Most times people are really nice. It's not a lot of talking. Listen to WTOP and, get in quick. It's a lifesaver.
Don't talk politics.
Don't talk politics and don't talk religion. There you go.
They're off to fight traffic and beat gas prices. And at the end of the day, they'll be busing, carpooling, and slugging home all over again.
At this moment, what is the single most important thing for people to know about what's happening with the price of oil?
I think people need to know that this isn't the market that they grew up with. It's not their father or their grandfather's market. That this is ultimately a resource which is going to get tight, but not necessarily now. And they need to make some sensible choices. They need to recognize that they have to look at their own personal lives and recognize that they're going to have to make some sacrifice for it, and realize that prices may drop, and they may drop below $3 a gallon in the next 18 months, but they're going to tend to be swinging wildly, sort of swinging between $2.50 and perhaps $5 a gallon. So when you're looking at that, you better plan for the tough days as well as the days when it's not so much of a dent in your wallet.
With oil prices going up, gasoline prices going up, what will be the effect on companies such as Ford and General Motors, which already have their troubles?
I think they've got a lot of trouble for the rest of the decade. They didn't probably invest in enough of the smaller car technologies and the hybrids. I mean, they're making some strides now, but they're a little bit late to the game compared with some of the overseas manufacturers. So it's going to be rugged, and that's probably one of the reasons why politically you won't have necessarily this debate real soon about putting in some tougher standards or tilting the behavior, because tilting the behavior could really hurt Detroit.
That's because Detroit invested heavily in SUVs in the 1990s. But that strategy looks like a bad bet now as gasoline prices keep jumping higher. The Kelley Blue Book says the value of SUVs has dropped $3,000 to $5,000 in the last 6 months, a sharp depreciation that's affecting all SUV owners, including Vitaly Sapiro. Sapiro is trying to sell his 2002 Toyota Land Cruiser. He told us he's ready to entertain any reasonable offer.
People who always wanted to buy this car and couldn't might be able to get a car at a bargain price.
He paid almost $60,000 for his SUV 6 years ago, and he'll take less than $25,000 for it now. Sapiro drives 25 miles from his home in Closter, New Jersey to New York City every day. When he first bought the car, $50 would fill the tank. Not so today.
Every time we bring it to the gas station, it's $75 to $80.
And that means there are more SUVs than ever sitting in car lots. According to the National Automobile Dealers Association, sales of SUVs since January are down more than 28% compared to the same time last year. But small car sales are up 7% during the same period.
People are looking for cars that are either hybrids or, definitely SUVs that used to be hot a couple of years ago, no longer have the cachet.
Car dealers across the country are resorting to uncommon tactics to attract reluctant buyers, offering gas cards, discount gas, or, as a dealer in Missouri is doing, giving away a handgun with every purchase. And manufacturers are appealing to shoppers' sense of green.
At Toyota, we're not only working toward cars with zero emissions, we're we're also striving for zero waste in everything else we do.
Shapiro is lucky in one way. He owns his Land Cruiser. Those who still have loans on their vehicles are finding they might owe more than the SUV is worth. Even with that advantage, Shapiro thinks it could take months to sell his Land Cruiser.
And at some point, I'm going to have to make a decision whether I'm going to stick with the car until it dies, which will probably be never, or sell it probably at less money than I was hoping to get for it.
And from the gas guzzlers to the gas obsessed, you're about to ride along on a commute here in Connecticut with a driver who is consumed with consumption. He gets sometimes in his car over 100 miles a gallon.
It's 9:30 in the morning in Essex, Connecticut, and John Flory is giving us a class in the art of the commute.
This is a little bit of a downhill, and I pick up a few miles per hour.
He's not trying to set the record for getting to work quickly. He's trying to set the record for getting there on the cheap. Flory has a 68-mile round-trip commute. Most Americans with a daily drive like this would burn through a tank of gas in a week. Flory coasts on a tank for a month.
A really good tank of gas would be over 1,000 miles on a tank, so that's about 10.8 gallons, give or take.
Do the math. That's about 100 miles per gallon.
Just takes regular.
Flory calls himself a hypermiler, meaning he has adjusted his driving so that he can conserve every drop of gas possible. Flory owns a Honda Insight Hybrid, but there's more to hypermiling than that.
You don't need to own a hybrid to be a hypermiler. It applies to all different kinds of cars, trucks, you name it. The methods are slightly different for different kinds of cars, and you kind of have to figure out what works for you on your commute and your vehicle.
Here, according to Flory, are the basics of hypermiling.
First things they generally recommend is just slow down. Another thing they recommend is put more air pressure in your tires up to the point, the recommended maximum sidewall pressure that's listed on the side of the tire. And what that does is you waste less energy in flexing the tire, and you get better coasting. The car rolls better.
Flory is always conscious, hyper-conscious, of everything going on both inside and outside his car. From air conditioning...
That kills your mileage.
...to traffic lights.
I know that this light ahead in the evenings is a very short light, but now in the middle of the day it's going to be a little longer, so I allowed for that.
Flory even tries to keep his windows rolled up so the air rushing in doesn't cause drag. And he keeps his foot off the brake.
And I'm trying to maintain speed through this corner because I don't want to lose momentum. You don't want to be unsafe, but as much as possible you want to conserve your momentum in the turns. So you try to drive the turns as fast as is reasonable.
But fast certainly isn't the way Flory drives during most of his commute. You can often find him in the right lane, driving 45 in a 65.
You have to adjust your whole mentality to, I want you to pass me. And that's hard at first, but please, go by.
On this day, Flory clocked his morning commute at an impressive 103 miles per gallon average, close to his record. But for this gas guru, it's still not enough.
Each day I learn a little bit more, and I'm able to do a little bit more. So I've been learning for 2 years with this car, and I'm still improving.
While some drivers try to get better mileage out of their cars, more and more Denver commuters are deciding to leave their cars at home. A new report shows riders of public transportation in the U.S. jumped up 3% from last year. The biggest increase was in light rail riders, up 10%. Denver resident Chad Bernhardt is one of them.
There's no point of me driving downtown just to park my car for 8 hours. It just makes sense for me to just catch the light rail.
In a city better known for its love of the pickup, the cost of gas is changing the driving culture. Almost every American city has watched the number of people using mass transit shoot up. Denver has had the highest weekday use recorded since the system opened in 1994.
It does make me feel good that I'm not driving my car. Plus, I can get some reading done on light rail. I also use the light rail to go to school.
Denver is one of the most congested cities in the country. The light rail riders we spoke to said their commute takes about the same amount of time it does to drive, but with far fewer headaches.
You don't have to deal with all the other traffic and other drivers.
People driving downtown have a tendency to drive a little crazy.
And as Trish Logan knows, the light rail is a reliable alternative in a city that got 35 inches of snow last year.
And during the winter months, it's hard to get downtown with the snow, and the light rail always makes it.
While more commuters are now using mass transit to go from their suburban homes to their jobs in the cities, coming up, two cities that are trying to make where we live and where we work one and the same.
Atlanta, Georgia has long had a reputation of urban sprawl. Its 5.1 million residents are spread out over 8,000 square miles, an area larger than the state of Massachusetts. The suburbs are lined with mansions and new developments. The daily commute for most can be an hour or more in each direction. Still, a decade ago, you would have been hard-pressed to convince most Atlantans to give up suburbia for the city, but that didn't stop one developer.
The original concept of Atlantic Station really was to build a sustainable neighborhood. In a city of neighborhoods, that's what Atlanta is. And it started with one idea: let's clean up a steel mill.
Brian Leary is Vice President of Design and Development for Atlantic Station in the heart of Atlanta. A decade ago, he dreamed of cleaning up an old steel mill site and selling a whole new lifestyle to Atlantans.
You know, Atlanta is known as a poster child for things like sprawl and air quality problems and things like that. We thought Atlantic Station could be a great answer to some of those challenges.
In 1997, one of those challenges was not high gasoline prices. They were only about $1.30 a gallon then. But even so, Leary was convinced that Atlantans needed to change the way they relied on automobiles. He and his team had in mind a mixed-use complex of townhomes and apartments embedded with commercial space that included restaurants, shopping, and amenities, all built around the idea that it was better to walk than drive.
Atlanta is a city where we drive to where we walk. Think about that for a second. It's a beautiful day. I want to go for a walk. Everyone piles in the car, drives someplace to do that. We drive as a region 110 million miles a day. That's more than any region on the planet. That's enough to go from the earth to the sun and start coming back. Every day we do that. So Atlantans love to drive. And in many ways, Atlantans have to drive to get around.
But these days, Atlantic Station is looking pretty peachy.
With fuel prices now above $4 a gallon, with traffic continuing to back up on the interstates, people's time relates to people's money more so than ever, particularly when you're wasting it in traffic. So Atlantic Station, in many ways, is an antidote to that. The sign could say, if you lived here, you'd be home now.
For Leary, the pitch now is easier than it's ever been. It's all about cost-saving, car-free convenience.
Hey, let's say you're feeling great. It's the end of the day. You know you need a gallon of milk. You can go by the grocery store. Now, if you're a woman, you can also head upstairs and get a pair of pumps because we have a shoe store right on top. So you can get Heels and Meals all in one building.
Literally, I don't have to leave. I don't have to leave Atlantic Station.
Stay-at-home mom, Kathy Grays, is one resident that no longer has to rely on her car to get around.
We'll have people come over and we'll say, okay, let's go out to dinner. And we start to walk outside and they're confused, like we're walking, and we're like, yeah, because by the time you drove to the parking deck and walked up, it's faster just to walk there. And so it is a little bit of a mindset, but I think you would just automatically get used to it, just like we did.
There was a time when the Grays family, just like their friends, relied on their cars for everything. That all changed when they moved here from the Atlanta suburb of Woodstock.
I probably filled up at least once a week when I was in Woodstock, just going to friends' houses and that sort of thing. And now it's probably half that. It's probably every 2 weeks or so.
One of the reasons we really liked Atlantic Station is because we don't ever have to get in our car. I'm actually selling my car.
Caroline Fleming and her husband just moved here from Lubbock, Texas, where they own 2 cars and commuted about an hour each day. Now, she doesn't have to use her car at all.
Well, what I do is I wake up in the morning and I walk about 30 feet down to the corner, and Atlantic Station has a shuttle bus. And the shuttle bus takes me to the nearest MARTA station, and then since my work is just right up the hill, it's a block from that MARTA station, I just walk to my office. I can walk outside of my door and be at my desk at work in 12 minutes. So it's amazing. I love it.
And she feels that she's living a greener lifestyle.
I feel like I don't really have as much of an impact on the environment as I did when we were using all the gas. Both my husband and I each had to fill up, 1 to 2 tanks of gas per week in our car. And so now, we're not going to be using any of that.
That is exactly what Atlantic Station wants its residents and employees to think about. Healthy lifestyle changes and energy awareness.
So it's really not trying to make people feel bad about using the car. It's making them feel good about doing something different. We have a car share program out here as well. Zipcar, you can just check a car out by the hour. Atlanta needs an alternative, and Atlantic Station has provided that.
All this convenience does come with sacrifices. You could own a nice home in the suburbs for the cost of a 2-bedroom here, but that's a trade-off many Atlantic Station residents don't mind.
It's very cost efficient to live over here, even though it's a little bit more expensive, but I mean, it kind of evens out once you equal in all the commuting and stuff that I don't have to do.
Atlantic Station is about 45% developed and will not be completed for another 8 to 10 years. Grace, who is expecting another baby at the end of the year, wonders what things will be like for her children another decade from now.
When I've done my 2 previous kids' baby books, it has all the things that you record, and one of the things is gas prices. And with my first daughter, it was something ridiculous, like $1.80. Willie John Jones, are you in the tub? When I see $4, $4.20, whatever, it hit another record high today, I think about, what am I going to have to write in this kid's baby book?
Leary says residents here can be reassured that even if gasoline prices do continue to rise, Atlantic Station will be here for them.
The roads can only get so wide, and our roads have been built for 25 years, but we think Atlantic Station is going to be around a heck of a lot longer than that. We want to make sure we've planned for it.
Across the country from Atlanta is a city that's been planning for the future for a long time. When it comes to transportation and development, Portland, Oregon is way ahead of the game. 3 decades ago, Portland drew a line around the city and pledged to keep all urban growth within that boundary. To make it work, the city has come up with innovative public transportation options, from speedy city buses to the powerful light rail to sleek new air trams. And in 2001, Portland launched the first modern streetcar system in the country. Michael Powell, whose bookstore has been a Portland institution for almost 30 years, sees the benefit of the streetcar firsthand.
I finally passed the $80 mark the other day when I filled my gas tank. That makes you think, and for a lot of people, that's a big chunk of change. Being able to ride a streetcar, that's a very viable alternative to the old Betsy and the gas and the maintenance and the parking and all of the associated costs with owning a car. Many of the people who now live in this neighborhood have downsized to 1, in some cases no cars.
But it's not just about getting rid of cars. It's about economic growth. Where once Powell's Books was surrounded by empty buildings, the streetcar has transformed it into one of the most vibrant neighborhoods in the city.
Personally, it's been exciting to see the neighborhood blossom. It was funky, but a little too funky before. Too many dark corners, too many empty buildings. Now it's a very lively nighttime scene. We're open till 11 o'clock every night. It's very vigorous, vital. Lots of restaurants, bars, stores, homes, parks. And the streetcar has been a facilitator of that. It's just been amazing to watch it happen. People really like riding a train. They just smile. I think that sort of takes them back to their childhood in some way. The fascination with track transportation is just something that people are very excited about.
The streetcar is really about neighborhood transportation, and it's really about the pedestrian and making it possible for pedestrians to go just a little bit further than they would be likely to go on foot.
Gloria Olin literally wrote the book on streetcars. She works for a nonprofit group pushing for more public transportation in more cities. And she's been consulting with dozens of communities across the country that are interested in starting their own streetcar systems. Olin says they're a cheap solution to inspire urban renewal.
We call them development-oriented transit because when you put the streetcar tracks down in the street, developers want to be close to the streetcars. There was a study in Portland that showed that developers built at 90% of allowable density right next to the streetcar line, and that it tapered off to about 45% of allowable density at 3 blocks and further away.
In Portland, this isn't theory, it's a reality you can see.
We were surrounded literally by empty buildings that had been a brewery. And while it was a brewery, the neighborhood smelled nice, but it was empty buildings. They weren't the best neighbors. Now they're filled with residents and offices and retails.
It all seems so modern. And yet, a century ago, downtowns in cities across America looked very much like today's Portland.
Well, streetcars were very popular in the 20s and 30s, and most systems, I think, were around until the 40s and 50s. But after World War II, of course, everybody came back, and America was booming, and the suburbs were booming, and everybody wanted a car, and streetcars just fell out of popularity.
So 100 years later, we went back and we figured out an old lesson that actually was pretty good.
Rick Gustafson is the head of the Portland Streetcar Company. He says Portland's foresight in favoring public transportation over expanding their highway system has had tremendous results.
Portland is very proud of the fact that today, in 2008, there are no more cars driving in downtown than there were in 1970. We handle 12,000 trips a day, nearly 4 million riders a year on the streetcar.
At just 4 miles long, the Portland streetcar crisscrosses the city, connecting hospitals, colleges, restaurants, offices, and apartment buildings. Over the last 7 years, it's already been extended 3 times. And for the thousands of daily users, the best part is the ride is free for much of the route. For Gustafson, the success of the streetcar is obvious for anybody who comes to Portland.
Well, we're standing in Jamison Square in Portland, which is the popular Pearl District, which was developed in the late 90s and early 2000s around the streetcar line. With parks, open space, essentially a walkable urban environment, it actually ended up being the best place to live in the Portland region.
Pearl District resident Dee Abate is out for a morning of errands with her granddaughter. She says the change here has been remarkable.
10 years ago, it was truly very industrial, old warehouses. I'm not sure there was anything down here.
But when the streetcar line went in, so did Abate. She sold her condo in Washington State to move to the neighborhood.
We're actually heading up to the grocery store. I needed a few things, so we're embarking out on the streetcar. I babysit once a day, so we hit the car and away we go. And this will take you to museums. It just takes you to everything. It's nice because, you know, I'll tell you, sometimes I don't drive my car for 4 or 5 days. And that's wonderful, wonderful. A lot of people don't have a car here because of that. They don't even need to.
But for Michael Powell, the streetcar represents more than just freedom from cars or the rebirth of a neighborhood.
It makes a statement about your city, that you care, first off, about the environment, and you care about how people move around. We're not here as the enemy of the car, but we're here to recognize that cars have their limitation. The streetcars were originally designed to solve problems when there were no cars or when cars were very expensive. Well, cars in a different way are very expensive today, and the streetcar is as relevant now as it was at the turn of the 20th century.
The airline industry is certainly feeling its share of the pressure. That's because, there's no better way to put it, jet fuel prices are soaring. Several smaller airlines have filed for bankruptcy protection in the past few months, while the larger carriers in the U.S. have moved toward reductions in flight schedules, grounding heavy planes, and layoffs of people. Some of the larger carriers are introducing a variety of extra fees and higher ticket prices in an effort to compensate for the doubling of jet fuel costs since January of last year. American Airlines, the largest in the country, has announced a new $15 fee on passengers' first checked piece of baggage. That's in addition to the recently enacted $25 charge on a second checked bag. But according to Tom Closa, high fuel prices aren't just affecting big businesses.
In the rest of the world right now, the perception and probably a little bit of the reality is that the product that's tightest and the demand is growing the fastest for diesel fuel, transportation diesel, diesel to power generators, diesel to run the mines, diesel to run the agriculture. That's why diesel prices are above $5 on bookends of the country in California and New York. Jet fuel as well. Jet fuel prices are very, very high. The U.S. is probably the last big, broad gasoline economy. If you look at Brazil, they're using more of an ethanol blend as well. And most of the European countries have a dieselification policy. That's probably a word I just created, but they probably use 55% or more of their vehicles use diesel instead of gasoline. They get better mileage, but it would be a tough sell in the United States with diesel prices above $5 a gallon to use those turbo diesel engines.
We've talked about, for example, the skyrocketing price of jet fuel. And that affects big airlines and eventually affects consumers. Let's talk about smaller businesses. With the high price of oil, what does it do to small and medium-sized businesses?
Well, I tell you, Dan, right now, if you're a trucking company, if you're in the fishing business, if you're doing anything in transportation, you're really dancing on a knife's edge. We're seeing a lot of small trucking companies, even mid-sized trucking companies, go out of business. And if anyone's been on the road lately, you can tell the trucks are going slower and there's not as many of them. Now, that may be a silver lining, I suppose, but it's not going to be a silver lining when you get the goods delivered and the price is higher for everything.
Paul Dwyer is one of those who's struggling. Out of 3.5 million truckers nationwide, he's one of 400,000 independent operators. A milk hauler in Wisconsin, it took him nearly a quarter century to build up his fleet of 5 milk trucks. He was able to handle the rising price of diesel for a while, but no longer.
When it hit $4, you know, then the grim reality is that each truck was taking about $425 a day's worth of fuel. You times that by 5 and you got a $2,000 a day fuel bill. You know, and yeah, I panicked.
Dwyer's day begins at dawn as he travels 40 miles to a dairy farm in Unalaska, one of dozens of farms across the state where he picks up milk. 76 miles down the road at the processing plant, the milk will be pasteurized and made into mozzarella cheese and sold across the country. For Dwyer, this is not just a job. It's what he loves to do.
When I started hauling milk, that's when I knew that I found what I wanted to do. It's just the close relationship you have with each farm. They're not only business contacts, but they become your friends.
But the high fuel prices have changed the milk business, and not just for the truckers. As diesel goes up, it costs more to process the milk, as well as transport it, and ultimately everything gets more expensive. At the end of the chain, you see the higher prices every time you go to the store.
In the past few months, a gallon of milk that used to be like $2.49 a gallon is now over $3.05 a gallon, and some of it's even higher than that.
As a nation, we depend on trucking to deliver just about every bite of food we eat. Even if it travels by air or rail, the first and last mile to the store still goes by truck. Independent haulers like Dwyer provide competition for the bigger companies and help keep down the cost of shipping. But when it comes to their expenses, they can't negotiate volume discounts like the big guys on just about everything from truck parts to fuel. Around the country, independent truckers have been holding protests, like this recent one in Pennsylvania.
This is probably the worst it's ever been. 6 months ago, I was pretty happy with everything. Yeah, fuel price was on the rise, but it was okay. You know, it was still manageable. But now I worry that our economy can't handle this high fuel price. And I worry that the economy is going to collapse. And if it collapses, someday I'll wake up and I'll be as broke and poor as a church mouse. I will have the farm skillet.
The cost of diesel is topic number one at the local diner.
You know the East Side Dairies over there?
Yeah, Easttown?
Yeah. Well, from Sunday night till Wednesday night, he spent $12,000 on fuel.
After lunch, Dwyer stops at 2 more dairy farms, collecting his last loads for the day.
Are you hauling the rest of the week?
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I am.
The good news for Dwyer is that his day ends around 3 in the afternoon. The bad news is that after 262 miles on the road, it's time to fuel up.
Today the bill is $333.63. We had 71 gallons of fuel. 2 weeks ago our fuel was about $4.38 a gallon. We're up almost 30 cents in 2-week period.
By Dwyer's estimate, that's an additional $6,000 a month.
Hello, Dwyer Mill.
The higher fuel bill means less money for other expenses.
Maybe the tire guy won't get paid this month. Maybe the shop won't get their money this month, for repairs and maintenance that I don't do. It's like a lottery system. You got to pick and choose who gets paid and who don't get paid. But drivers have to be paid and the fuel bill has to be paid.
How long will it be before Dwyer parks his trucks for good? He says he'll hang on as long as he can, but that it all depends on what happens at the pump.
If the fuel price spiked and went to $6, $7 a gallon, that would probably be enough to take us out. And like I say, 25 years is done and over. So then I could be a Walmart greeter.
And while small businesses are seeing their fuel bills go up by thousands of dollars, the U.S. military, the largest single user of fuel, measures its fuel costs in the billions. That's with a B. The armed forces uses some 340,000 barrels of oil a day. That's 1.5% of all the oil used by this country. And the single biggest user in the military is the Air Force.
The biggest single cost for the Air Force is jet fuel. It flies through more than 200 million gallons of fuel a month. In the past 4 years, the Air Force's costs for jet fuel alone have doubled to $6 billion last year.
Every time a barrel of oil increases by $10, that equates to $660 million annually of additional expense for the United States Air Force and for the American taxpayer.
It's Bill Anderson's job to cut the Air Force's fuel bill. He is the Assistant Secretary for Installations, Environment, and Logistics.
We're talking about cost increases that are in the billions of dollars, not pocket change. It severely impacts the way that you can that you have to run your operation.
Spiraling costs have forced the Air Force to go green.
The largest solar array in the Americas is at Nellis Air Force Base outside of Las Vegas. It's actually saving, we project, on an annual basis, the American taxpayer $1 million a year in energy costs. So we're looking at renewables like solar, like wind, like biomass materials, and we're also looking at whether nuclear, small package nuclear facilities are feasible at Air Force bases.
Another option, using synthetic fuel derived from coal instead of petroleum. Anderson says that coal-based fuel is less expensive and can be produced in an environmentally friendly way without relying on foreign countries.
They refer to the United States as the Saudi Arabia of coal. So if you can learn to use coal in a very clean way, it provides a tremendous number of options and flexibility.
So far, synthetic fuel has been used successfully in the B-52 and B-1 bombers, as well as this C-17 cargo plane. The Air Force intends to get half its fuel from non-petroleum sources by 2016. The war in Iraq has shown that cutting fuel saves more than just dollars. It can save lives. That's because getting fuel convoys to the battlefield puts troops at risk.
So if we can take convoys off the road, that's a good thing. If we take airplanes out of the sky that aren't necessary for transportation, it's a good thing. The soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine of the future probably will be a greener member of the military than our folks are today, because not only because of the price of fuel, but because it's going to make it easier to do the mission as we move forward.
Tonight, you've seen many ways the country is coping with high fuel prices. We've seen examples of struggle and innovation. While no one seems confident in predicting how high the prices will go, everyone seems to have their own theory as to why they're going up. To try and make sense of the madness, here again is analyst Tom Closa.
When you talk to oil company executives, I've tried to talk to some, what they say is the blame is on speculators. That's a quote. If you're looking for somebody to blame it on the speculators or financial players. What do you think of that?
There's an incredible flow of money, and not traditional money, not coming from oil companies and not coming from end users like airlines or refiners, that's been pouring into the oil markets, not specifically oil, all commodities, but oil is probably the one that strikes the most attention with the public. And that investment, a buy and hold strategy in particular, for really billions of dollars, is probably more to do with why oil is about $130 or more than why it's $50 or $70, such as we saw earlier in the decade.
The fact that many people, some call them speculators, are buying and selling commodities, are they the biggest culprits?
I think they're the culprits in this move from, let's say, $100 to $130 a barrel. Whenever a flood of money, money is the biggest fundamental out there. And when everyone thought Krispy Kreme was a great bet, the price of Krispy Kreme went up despite some of the short sellers who said this is ridiculous, it shouldn't be moving that high. And the same thing's happening in oil right now. People aren't sort of intrepid enough to sell into it. And there's a sense that more and more pension money and sort of sleepy investment money is going to come in and buy all commodities, including oil. But oil and corn and metals are some of the favorites right now. If you look at all commodities since 2007, they've all risen, perhaps not in tandem with one another, but quite substantially. It's one of the great moves of an asset class of this decade. Much more than real estate, much more than stocks, much more than bonds.
What about the peak theory, something called, quote, the peak theory? What is it and how does this figure in?
Well, peak oil is the notion that we've reached sort of the capacity of finding oil and it's going to be in decline. And there's a lot of different theories about that, whether it's going to be 2015 or beyond. But we really won't know when we're past peak, so to speak, until we're looking at it in the rearview mirror. So there's a lot of things we can do rather than say we're at the peak and we need to do this or that. There's some sensible action that can be taken.
Such as?
Well, I think we really need to have a dialogue about this investment flow, not just in oil, but into all commodities. It's one thing when you have a proliferation of funds and it drives the price of stocks higher, like we saw in the 80s or the 90s. But it's a different thing when it's driving the prices of core commodities that really a lot of the world depends on for sustenance. We can be engaging in a little bit of statistical immorality here. And I'd like to see some circuit breakers. I'd like to see some more margin so that people can't be levered and really have small pieces of money and control large chunks of paper oil, so to speak. And I think we really need to think about it as a country and perhaps across a number of countries and think about whether it's wise to have investment money flowing into things like corn and grain and oil that are really lifeblood instruments for the population. That has dramatic consequences, and it's really something that's only happened in the last 5 or 6 years. Commodities used to be the province of the speculators and the pros, and now it may be that in the next few years, individuals may not even know it, but they're investing in these things.
I don't quite understand that. Individuals might not even know it, but they're investing in oil, coal.
Well, they could have money that's in a 401k, for example, and they may allocate it to sort of a commodities portion or whatever. This is mostly something that the well-heeled individuals have now. People with literally millions of dollars of venture capital or capital that they want to have investment banks put at work. And this can go to basically fuel the fire, so to speak, and drive these prices for oil or for grain higher. India recently outlawed trading rice as a commodity there. And I think they're worried about it because they're worried about potential famine. And you wouldn't call it a famine with oil, but certainly if people don't have the right to buy it at a reasonable price because of investment money flowing in, that's a problem.
The question is out there and begs to be asked, is it moral or is it immoral to use speculation in commodities, the basic human needs, for strictly profit and some would say greed?
I think that's the question we have to ask. And I think that's the question that not just Americans have to answer, but the other developing countries and the other prosperous countries, because we could reward the elite in this country, but we really could put a lot of people over the edge into poverty. And I think it's a good question to ask. I don't know the answers. I don't know if some of the solutions could be more violent or more damaging than keeping the present system, but I think it's a good debate and a good dialogue to have these days.
Are we having that national debate?
Not yet. I'm starting to see a few columnists talk about it, and I'm starting to see some people, even within the oil business, they're mostly quiet voices, but they're saying the business has been taken over by the financial houses. And not that the financial companies are guilty of any particular collusion. It's sort of the collusion of like thinking, where everybody believes that this is going to be the favored asset class and the prices go higher.
You know as well or better than I do that people say, listen, free market is the answer. The free market will eventually take care of all of this. So we don't need legislation, we don't need regulation, we don't need any circuit breakers. Just let it go and the market will take care of it.
Well, that's possible, but free markets can deliver out pain and they can mete out pain in unbelievable doses. And one can say that $150 to $200 barrel oil is a good thing based on carbon footprints and based on the conservation it inspires, but then you have to look at all the people on the margins of society, whether in the US or abroad, that really get hurt by this. And I think it's a dialogue we need to have, not just with oil, but with other sort of lifeblood commodities. And we're starting to hear some murmurs about it right now, probably not in political circles, but within the people who professionally watch commodities markets.
By lifeblood commodities, you mean rice, corn, wheat, coal?
Right, it's something which would be difficult to do without. And in the US, it would be difficult for people to do without their gasoline. And I can't recall since Jimmy Carter where anybody asked for the US population to make any sacrifices on energy. So I don't expect we'll see anything on that score by November.
What should these candidates be proposing?
Well, I wish they would propose that we really think about having some energy discipline or a national energy discipline program. And I think they should be talking about extra drilling as well as some conservation. You know, do something for the left and do something for the right. But I also recognize that to ask the Americans to make sacrifice these days is probably political suicide, so I wouldn't expect anything to happen.
Do you believe that asking Americans to make a sacrifice would be political suicide? It's well accepted in the political world.
Right.
You do it, you die.
I think that once one gets elected, one can do it, but I'm enough of a longtime journalist and a cynic to believe that it might not work this year. You know, I think pretty highly of the American people, but I think that would be a tough sell.
Tom Closo. And that's our report tonight from Connecticut. For HDNet, Dan Rather reporting. Good night.
If you would like to add your name to an email list for information on upcoming programs, or if you would just like to send a question or comment, please email us at viewer@hd.net.
What and or who is to blame? For context and perspective, I sat down with Tom Closo, founder of the Oil Price Information Service. He's one of the best reporters around about oil and gas. He's been following gasoline price trends for decades. As you know, I'm a Texan by birth and by choice. And said only half jokingly that in Texas, don't mess with my mama and don't mess with my pickup truck.
Right.
Even though the pickup truck may get 15 miles to the gallon. Realistically, any chance of changing that mindset nationally?
I think the mindset's starting to change. I mean, now that we've had prices go to $4 in some places, and we've had this bipolar market which has these tremendous swings, I noticed last month that the small car and vehicle sales represented 20% of total U.S. Vehicle sales. And that may not seem like a big threshold, but that's a big, big number in the automotive business. So you're hearing more about it. You're hearing more about it, whatever mode of travel you have. And it takes a while to breed that sentiment change. And we're seeing a little bit of a shift. It would be nice if it was pushed, because there really is no downside of conservation or doing things practically. But you can't expect an industry like the energy industry to say drive less or whatever. I mean, we wouldn't expect that from anyone else that manufactures widgets or any other product.
Do you or do you not subscribe to the theory that $4 a gallon gasoline on any consistent, lasting basis is the tipping point? If it goes above that, then the public will start going to scooters, bicycles, walking more.
We are using less, and that's going to show up in the subsequent data. Right now, the investment community and the speculative community believes that the rest of the world still has this growing appetite
to getting around and getting around efficiently.
Drew Teague is a Vespa salesman who has been dealing with a mad rush of commuters who are willing to leave the safety of their cars to avoid the pain at the pump. While big cars are sitting in showrooms, Teague's sales of these Italian-made scooters are up more than 100%. And he has a problem most car dealers would love.
So we're selling over twice as many bikes, to the point where it's almost hard to keep them in stock. We've actually had to get shipments about every week, truckloads of bikes in here to fulfill the needs of what everybody's looking for. I just had a couple that came in. They each had a Range Rover, getting, sub 15 mpg per vehicle, and they said, we have just had it, So they're selling one, they're getting a Vespa, and they're tripling or more their average fuel efficiency for their transportation.
The main selling point of a Vespa is not how much time you can save on your commute, but how much gas. Vespas can get up to 70 miles per gallon, almost double the mileage of a hybrid car. And that's made these $5,000 scooters an easy sell, wherever gasoline prices are high.
And here in Connecticut, the roads aren't as crowded, but drivers have the dubious distinction of paying the highest gas prices in the country, well north of $4 a gallon, and climbing. This is a story that affects everyone and ripples through every segment of our society. So the question is, how high will gas prices go? And what's caused the price of oil, what's really caused it, to more than double in the last year? Throughout tonight's program, we intend to give you a look at not only the consequences, as you just saw from Southern California, but also what
tight for fuel. We'll get the data on that well down the road, but there's no question that Americans have cut back. In California, people have cut back by about 4.5%. And that's a lot when you consider all the new drivers coming into the motor pool each year. That's a significant sacrifice. It's not like the 70s where maybe people would cut back by much more because it was a tripling or quadrupling of price, but people are making some sacrifices. Unfortunately, a lot of folks because they have to, not because they're making it as a matter of choice or because of social responsibility.
Here's an interesting number. Americans drove 11 billion fewer miles this March than they did in March 2007. It's the sharpest drop ever reported. So how are they getting to work? We take you to the suburbs of Washington, D.C., where former die-hard drivers are changing their habits early and often.
5:58 a.m. Friday morning at the Dulles Transit Center in Loudoun County, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. The bus line is already full of the newly converted for the hour-long bus drive into town.
Gas is too high. You need to come up with alternatives, and this is one of the alternatives to get us to work.
Loudoun County just added 2 more buses and says ridership is up 29% from last year. 6:30 a.m. at the Wheelie Park and Ride in Reston, Virginia. Karen Burrows meets her carpool.
All right, everybody's ready?
We're all ready. It's Friday.
Their 20-mile trip made easier by carpooling.
It's the only way to go. Carpooling is the only way to go.
You save money, you're going to save on gas, you save wear and tear on your car, frustration of driving.
I save about $3,240 a year.
A walk in L.A.
But even in this car-crazed capital, $4 a gallon gasoline has made this a common scene.
All right, let me go over a couple of things with you and we'll be on our way, okay? Okay.
Claudia Rode is picking up her new Toyota Yaris.
I was just looking for something economical that looks good, you know, good in gas, and I think I found the perfect car. It looks great and it's very compact.
Small in size, but big on mileage. 39 on the highway. But in LA, always on the cutting edge, there's small, and then there's small. Really small. This is the latest trend on California roads. And talk about mileage. This baby sips where others drink.
I'm so glad that I drive the Vespa every day.
This is Russell Stroud, and this is how he gets around town. Really, his Vespa scooter, all 12 horsepower, is the latest trend. And in a city known for creative driving, the Vespa adds this to the mix.
I think people hate it when I go by and they're sitting still on the freeway and I'm zipping through the cars. Sometimes they even kind of edge towards you to keep you from going by. If I'm driving my car to school, it's going to take me an hour, hour and 15, hour and a half. If I drive the Vespa, it's never taken me longer than 30 minutes, even with bumper-to-bumper traffic. Because, you know, you can go between the cars on the freeway, and besides that, you can go for a week without filling it up, and then when you fill it up, it's like $8.
But I think people are starting to realize that there are non-four-wheeled alternatives.
Tonight, why so high?
Prices may be swinging wildly between $2.50 and perhaps $5 a gallon. So you better plan for the tough days as well as the days when it's not so much of a dent in your wallet.
A special report understanding the dramatic increase in the price of gasoline. Before it goes up at the pump, it's being pumped up here. And from the cause to the consequences, American ingenuity keeps the country rolling.
There are non-four-wheeled alternatives to getting around and getting around efficiently.
We'll bring you the news next on Dan Rather Report.
And where else would you begin a report on gasoline than in Los Angeles, a city with more cars than eligible drivers? Traffic, it's as constant as California sunshine. Day or night, weekends, holidays, always, they're on the road. It's a metropolis that grew up alongside the automobile, paving the way for America's urban sprawl. In this part of the country, your identity has long been determined by what you drive. Hollywood has even looked at its own car culture in films like L.A. Story.
First stop is 6 blocks from here.
Why don't we walk?
Walk?